8 years, Daniel, and you're still exactly what you were the day I met you. Small. You still travel like you can't afford a suitcase.
No hard feelings, man. First class to Paris. I'm gonna show her how real men live.
Try not to look so lost without me.
I need my private jet ready in 20 minutes.
The boarding announcement echoed through Gate 12, but I wasn't the one holding a ticket. I stood there in my faded blue jacket, the one with a small tear near the pocket that Elena always said made me look like I couldn't afford better. She wasn't wrong about the jacket. She was wrong about everything else. "Here," she said, dropping her wedding ring into my palm like it was a coin she no longer needed. "And this too." She handed me a folded envelope. I didn't have to open it to know what it was. The lawyer's letterhead was already peeking through the seam. A divorce petition, signed and dated 3 days ago. 3 days. She'd been carrying this around for 3 days, smiling at me over breakfast, kissing me goodbye every morning, all while a signature waited in her purse like a loaded gun. 8 years, Daniel, she said, not even bothering to lower her voice. People around us were starting to stare, but Elena had never cared about being watched.
She liked it, actually.
8 years of watching you play it safe, the same job, the same modest house, that trust fund you're too scared to touch. I deserve more than modest. I deserve the world. Behind her, a man I'd never officially met stood with his hand resting a little too comfortably on the small of her back. Marcus Vance. I knew the name before I knew the face. Elena had mentioned him twice, always as a friend from the gallery, always with a laugh that lasted half a second too long. Marcus smiled at me, not a nervous smile, a smug one, the kind of smile a man wears when he thinks he's already won. "No hard feelings, man," he said, adjusting his sunglasses even though we were indoors. "First class to Paris. I'm going to show her how real men live." He glanced at my jacket, my scuffed shoes, the duffel bag I always traveled with instead of luggage. "You understand." I didn't say anything. I've learned that silence unsettles people far more than arguments do. Elena mistook my silence for defeat. She always did. She turned, laced her arm through Marcus's, and walked toward the jet bridge without looking back. Not even once, not even a flicker of hesitation, as if 8 years could be folded up and thrown away as easily as a boarding pass. The doors sealed behind them with a soft mechanical hiss. I stood there for exactly 4 seconds, long enough for a stranger nearby to give me a pitying look, the kind you give a man who's just been publicly humiliated. Long enough for the ring to grow warm in my closed fist. Then I turned, walked calmly to the far end of the terminal, and pulled out my phone. Not the cracked one I usually carried around Elena, the other one, encrypted. Direct line only to 5 people on Earth. "It's me," I said when the call connected. "I need the North Tarmac hangar cleared and the Gulfstream fueled in the next 20 minutes. A pause on the other end. "Understood, Mr. Cole. Should I inform the board you're traveling?" "No, this isn't board business." I glanced toward the jet bridge Elena had just disappeared through. "One more thing. Marcus Vance. He's on flight 118 to Paris, first class, seat 2A. I want everything on him. Background, finances, associates, on my desk by the time I land." "Right away, sir." I ended the call and allowed myself one long breath. See, here's what Elena never understood in 8 years of marriage. The modest, stagnant family trust she resented so much wasn't the whole picture. It was the cover. My grandfather built Ether Airways from 4 second-hand cargo planes into one of the largest airline networks in the world. And when he passed, he left me the company on one condition, that I prove I could live without it before I ever claimed it publicly. No press, no flaunting, no using the name to win people over. He wanted to know if anyone would ever love me for exactly what Elena saw when she looked at my jacket, and my quiet, ordinary life. Now I had my answer. I walked through the terminal, past gates full of people rushing for connections, past a newsstand with a magazine featuring Ether's newest aircraft on the cover, and out toward the private aviation entrance, where a black SUV was already waiting. As I climbed in, my assistant handed me a tablet with a single subject line blinking at the top of an incoming file. Marcus Vance, Preliminary Report. I hadn't even opened it yet, and already something told me this wasn't just a story about a woman who left her husband for a wealthier man. It was about a man who thought he was hunting a rabbit and had no idea he'd just climbed into a lion's plane. The Gulfstream's engines were already humming when I reached the hangar. I stepped inside, sat down, and opened the file. The first line alone made me go still. Marcus Vance's art gallery has been operating at a loss for 14 months. Estimated remaining assets, less than $40,000. Recent financial activity flagged for irregular access to corporate loyalty and rewards infrastructure. Origin traced to Ether Airways' internal systems. I read it twice. Marcus wasn't just some smug art dealer who'd swept my wife off her feet with charm and stolen glamour. He was already inside my company. The Gulfstream sat fueled and ready on the tarmac, but I wasn't boarding yet. Not until I understood exactly what I was walking into. I sat in the small briefing room attached to the hangar, the kind of space most Ether employees didn't even know existed. Soundproofed, windowless, built for conversations that never happened on paper. Across the table sat Renata Ibarra, my chief security officer. She'd worked for my grandfather before me, and in the 15 years I'd known her, I'd never once seen her rattled. She looked rattled now. "Talk to me," I said. She slid a folder across the table, thicker than I expected for someone I'd only heard about twice. Marcus Vance, 38, ran a contemporary art gallery in the design district. On paper it looks like success. Private clients, gallery openings, champagne photos all over social media. And underneath the paper? Underneath, it's a shell that's been dying for over a year. She tapped the folder. He hasn't sold a piece of real value in 14 months. He's been financing his lifestyle through loans he can't repay, credit lines that are maxed out, and... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Unauthorized access to corporate reward systems, including ours. I already knew that part. I needed the rest. How deep is he in? Deep enough that it's not an accident. Someone taught him how to get in, or he found a hole nobody patched. She opened the folder to a printed spreadsheet, rows of flagged transactions highlighted in red. Over the past 6 months, more than $200,000 in falsified corporate miles and lounge credentials have been funneled through a dummy travel account, first-class seats, VIP lounges, concierge upgrades, all of it billed as corporate partnership allowances from a shell company that doesn't exist in our actual partner network. My jaw tightened. So the first-class ticket to Paris. Fraudulent, same as the last 6 trips he's taken this year. Renata leaned back. Miami to Milan in March, Miami to Dubai in May. Each time a different woman on his arm, each time paid for with money that was never his. I sat with that for a moment. It should have felt like vindication, proof that Marcus was exactly the con artist my instincts told me he was the second he opened his mouth at the gate. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like watching a slow-motion collision I hadn't caused, but could have prevented if I'd just told Elena the truth about who I really was, years ago. There's something else, Renata said, and something in her voice made me look up. This wasn't random. Vance didn't stumble into your wife by accident. What do you mean? I mean he researched her. Financial records, social circles, even old photos from your wedding, pulled up months before he ever approached her at that gallery opening she mentioned to her friends. Renata slid another page across. He thought he was targeting a woman married to a man with modest means and low-level access somewhere inside a major airline. He assumed, because of your job title on paper, because of the quiet life you two lived, that you had system credentials he could exploit. Reward account manipulation, internal booking access, maybe even employee discount networks. He wasn't just seducing your wife, Daniel. He was using her as a way in. The room went quiet, except for the low hum of the air conditioning. It hit me slower than I expected, the shape of what she was describing. Marcus hadn't fallen for Elena's beauty, or her wit, or any of the things I once loved about her. He'd run a calculation. Modest husband, employee-level job title buried under years of intentional anonymity. Wife frustrated and hungry for more. An easy target to manipulate into unknowingly opening a door for him. He had no idea the door led straight into the house he was trying to rob. "He thinks I'm nobody," I said quietly. "He thinks you're an administrative employee who signs off on loyalty program adjustments," Renata corrected, which, ironically, isn't far from true. You do sign off on those. You just also happen to own the airline underneath it. For the first time since Elena dropped that ring into my palm, something other than grief moved through me. It was quieter than anger, colder than heartbreak. It was clarity. "Freeze everything tied to his fraudulent account," I said. "Not yet. Wait until they're airborne. I don't want this handled quietly in a back office. I want it handled where Elena can see exactly who she chose." Renata almost smiled. "And the flight?" "Let it board on time." I stood, buttoning my jacket, the same worn one Elena had mocked 2 hours earlier. "I want to be in Paris before they are. I want Marcus Vance to learn exactly whose company he tried to rob, in front of the one person whose opinion he was counting on to protect him." "And Elena?" I paused at the door, thinking of 8 years distilled into one image. Her walking away without looking back, so certain she was choosing a bigger life. "Elena," I said, "is about to learn the difference between a modest man and an invisible one." I walked out onto the tarmac as the Gulfstream's engines rose to a steady roar, the Miami sun catching off its wings like a blade catching light before it falls. Somewhere over the Atlantic, 39,000 feet above the water, Elena was sipping champagne she thought Marcus had paid for. I know this because I was watching it happen in real time. Every Ether aircraft streams live cabin data back to our operations center. Not surveillance in the way people imagine, just the basics. Seat manifests, service logs, crew notes. I sat in my private cabin on the Gulfstream with a tablet open, watching Flight 118's manifest update in real time, while Renata's team ran the final verification on Marcus Vance's fraudulent travel account. "Confirmed," came the voice through my headset. It was Talia, our fraud division lead, calm and precise the way she always was, even when delivering news that would detonate someone's life. "The account used to book seats 2A and 2B on Flight 118 is tied to a shell entity registered under a dissolved gallery LLC. Vance has been laundering unauthorized loyalty credits through it for months. This booking alone represents an $8,400 fraudulent charge." "Do it," I said. There's a particular kind of silence that happens when you give an order that will change someone's life in the next 60 seconds. I sat with it, watching the small dot representing Flight 118 crawl across the Atlantic on my screen, imagining the exact moment it would happen. I didn't have to imagine long. Talia patched me into the chief purser's private line so I could listen. Not to gloat, though I won't pretend some small, wounded part of me didn't want to hear it. I needed to know it was handled with dignity. Whatever Elena had done to me, I wasn't interested in becoming cruel because of it. "Mr. Vance," the purser's voice came through, professional and even. "I need to speak with you privately for a moment." I could hear the shift in the cabin, glasses clinking, low conversation pausing. "There appears to be an issue with the account used to purchase your tickets," the purser continued. "The corporate partnership under which this booking was made has been flagged for fraudulent activity. I'm going to need you and your guest to relocate to your assigned economy seating." Silence. Then Marcus's voice, tight and defensive. "There's some mistake. I booked this through a corporate contact. Check again." "I have, sir, multiple times. I'll need you to gather your belongings." I could picture it perfectly. the flush creeping up Marcus's neck, the practiced charm curdling into panic. A man who'd spent months building a costume of wealth was about to be undressed in front of the one person he needed to keep believing in it. "This is absurd," Marcus snapped, louder now, loud enough that other passengers were surely turning to look. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, sir," the purser replied, and something in her tone told me she'd been fully briefed. "Which is precisely why we need you to move." Then Elena's voice, quiet and confused. "Marcus, what's going on?" "Nothing. It's a mix-up. I'll handle it." He didn't handle it. I listened as the argument escalated in hushed, furious tones. Marcus insisting his cards would cover the fare difference, then the soft, humiliating beep of a card reader declining. Once, twice, 3 times. Each decline was a small door slamming shut on the man who'd promised Elena the world just hours earlier.
"Sir, I'll need you to move to seat 34C, the purser said finally, her patience wearing thin but never breaking. "Your guest may remain in her original assigned seat in the rear cabin." That detail alone told me everything. Elena's ticket had never been the fraudulent one. Marcus had booked himself into first class and stuck her in economy from the start, letting her believe otherwise so he could enjoy the appearance of generosity without the cost. Even his grand gesture had been half a lie. I closed my eyes and let that sink in. Elena had left me. Left 8 years. Left a life I'd built quietly and carefully, for a man who couldn't even give her the seat he'd promised. 20 minutes later, Talia sent me a still image pulled from cabin monitoring, standard protocol during active fraud investigations. Marcus sat crammed into a middle seat near the back of the plane, jaw clenched, sunglasses gone, his expensive shirt suddenly looking cheap under fluorescent light. Elena sat 2 rows ahead of him, alone, staring out the window with an expression I recognized instantly, even in a grainy photo. It was the look of someone realizing, mid-air, with no way to turn back, that she might have made a catastrophic mistake. I felt something twist in my chest that I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not quite. Something closer to grief for the woman I used to know, the one who existed before ambition curdled into greed. But I pushed it down. Feelings like that were a luxury I couldn't afford until this was finished. "Sir," Talia said carefully, "there's something else. When we pulled Vance's financial history deeper, we found a pattern. Elena isn't the first woman he's done this to. There were 2 before her, different names, different cities, same script. Meet a woman, promise her the world, fund it with someone else's money, disappear before the bill comes due." I stared out the small oval window at the endless blue stretching beneath the wing. "Except this time," I said quietly, "he picked the one woman whose husband owns the sky he's flying through." Talia didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. Somewhere behind us, still hours from Paris, Marcus Vance was learning that the world he'd tried to steal had teeth. And Elena was about to learn that the man she'd humiliated at Gate 12 that morning was already miles ahead of her, waiting. Paris greeted me with gray morning light and the particular quiet of a city not yet fully awake. My flight had landed at Charles de Gaulle nearly 6 hours before Elena and Marcus's, which meant that by the time their commercial jet began its slow descent over the Atlantic, I had already showered, changed, and driven across the city to the one place I actually wanted to be that morning. Not a hotel, not the corporate headquarters with its glass walls and framed magazine covers of planes I'd approved years ago. I went straight to the construction site of ETHA's new flagship terminal, a half-finished skeleton of steel and glass rising near the edge of the airport grounds, still wrapped in scaffolding and morning fog. There's something about unfinished buildings I've always loved. My grandfather used to say, "A structure tells the truth about the people who build it, but only while it's still being built. Once it's finished, everyone forgets the mess it took to get there." I found Clara exactly where I expected, on the 3rd-floor mezzanine,
hard hat under one arm, a rolled set of blueprints tucked against her hip, arguing gently but firmly with a contractor about ceiling height clearances. She didn't see me at first. I stood at the base of the scaffolding stairs and watched her work for a moment, the way she used to argue with professors 12 years ago in university studios, never raising her voice, never backing down either.
"You're early," she said without turning around, somehow sensing me before she saw me. Or I'm dreaming, because the chairman doesn't usually show up before his own security detail. "I gave them the morning off," I said. "Needed the walk." She turned then, and something in her face shifted when she really looked at me. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition of a version of me she hadn't seen in years. Tired, unshaven, wearing the same jacket I'd had on at gate 12 the day before because I hadn't bothered to change it before boarding the Gulf Stream. "You look like hell, Daniel." "Thank you. I mean it kindly." She set the blueprints down on a folding table and gestured toward 2 paper cups of coffee sitting untouched on the ledge, already gone lukewarm. "Sit, talk, or don't talk and just drink the coffee. Either works." I sat. Clara Odom had been my classmate at university, back when I studied architecture before my grandfather pulled me sideways into learning the airline instead. We'd spent 2 years designing imaginary buildings together in cramped studio rooms, arguing over sketches until 3 in the morning, surviving on vending machine food and stubborn ambition. There had been something between us then, something neither of us ever said out loud, because I left for the family business and she stayed to chase her degree, and by the time either of us looked back, the moment had quietly closed, like a door neither of us remembered shutting. 12 years later, she was the lead global designer for Ether Airways, and I still hadn't figured out whether hiring her 3 years ago had been the smartest business decision I'd ever made, or the most complicated. "Elena left me," I said, finally, no preamble, because Clara had never needed one. "At the gate, yesterday morning, handed me divorce papers and got on a flight to Paris with another man." Clara didn't gasp, didn't offer the reflexive sympathy people usually perform in these moments. She just watched me for a long beat, reading whatever was on my face. "And you flew here anyway, to Paris, where she was headed." "I flew here first," I corrected. "I landed 6 hours before her flight will." Something flickered across Clara's expression. Understanding, maybe amusement, maybe both. "Of course you did." We spent the next hour going over the terminal blueprints together, her finger tracing the curve of what would eventually be a glass atrium 3 stories tall, sunlight designed to fall at a specific angle every morning across a wall meant to display Ether's history. She talked about load-bearing calculations and material sourcing, and the argument she'd been having with the city planners over rooftop garden irrigation. And for the first time in 24 hours, my chest loosened slightly. It wasn't about the blueprints. It was about being looked at the way Clara looked at me. Like the years I'd spent building something quietly, invisibly, mattered. She never once glanced at my jacket. She never once asked what my portfolio was worth. She'd known exactly who I was for 3 years, ever since I'd personally recruited her away from a firm in London, and it had changed nothing about the way she spoke to me. "You built something real here," she said, gesturing at the half-formed terminal around us. "Elena never understood that modest doesn't mean small. It means patient. It means building something that outlasts flash." I studied her for a moment. "You always did understand things faster than everyone else in the room." "Occupational hazard of being an architect," she said, a small smile tugging at her mouth. "We spend our whole careers seeing what things will become before anyone else can." My phone buzzed against the table. A message from Renata. "Flight 118 has begun its descent. ETA Charles de Gaulle, 10:30 a.m. I looked up at Clara, who was watching me read the message with quiet curiosity. "They're landing in 3 hours," I said. Clara rolled the blueprints back into a tight cylinder and tucked them under her arm, standing with the kind of calm certainty that had drawn me to her all those years ago. "Then I suppose," she said,
We should make sure the welcome is memorable. For the first time since Gate 12, I actually smiled. By 10:15 that morning, the arrivals terminal at Charles de Gaulle looked nothing like the one Elena and Marcus had flown into 100 times before on ordinary trips. I stood near the head of a small, formal procession, the airport director, 2 representatives from French border security, and Renata a step behind me, arms folded, watching the arrivals board count down the minutes until Flight 118 touched the runway. Clara stood at my side, hard hat traded for a tailored blazer, blueprints replaced with a simple folder she held against her chest like armor. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly, glancing at the small formation of officials waiting with us.
I didn't do most of it, I admitted. The airport director insisted. Apparently, when the chairman personally requests to greet a flight, people take it seriously.
And the fraud case being handled here instead of quietly back in Miami?
That part, I said, I did do. Through the tall glass windows overlooking the tarmac, I watched the aircraft roll toward the gate, its ether livery gleaming under the grey Paris sky. Somewhere inside that fuselage, Elena was probably gathering her things, exhausted from a flight that hadn't gone anything like she'd imagined. Somewhere near the back, Marcus was likely rehearsing an excuse, some story to smooth over the humiliation of the last 18 hours, still not understanding that the real reckoning hadn't even started. The jet bridge connected. The doors opened. I watched the first-class passengers disembark first, out of habit more than anything, and it took me a moment to spot Elena in the second wave, coming from economy instead, her hair slightly flattened, mascara faintly smudged beneath her eyes, dragging a carry-on that had clearly been packed for a very different kind of trip. She looked tired in a way I'd never seen her look tired before. Not glamorous exhaustion, but the real kind, the kind that comes from a long day of quietly realizing you've made a terrible mistake. She didn't see me at first. Her eyes were fixed somewhere in the middle distance, unfocused, until they slowly drifted toward the formal line waiting near the gate, a line clearly assembled for someone important. Then she saw me. I watched the exact moment her expression fractured. Confusion first, the kind of double-take people do when they see something so out of place it takes the brain a second to process it. Then recognition. Then something that looked almost like fear. The airport director stepped forward before she could speak, extending a hand toward me with practiced formality. "Welcome back to Paris, Mr. Chairman. Everything has been arranged as requested." The words landed in the terminal like a stone dropped into still water. A few nearby travelers turned to look, murmuring, some recognizing the ether name stitched discreetly into the lapel of the director's uniform. Elena stood frozen 10 feet away, her carry-on handle still gripped in one white-knuckled hand. "Daniel." Her voice came out small, nothing like the confident, cutting tone she'd used at Gate 12 24 hours earlier. "What is this? What's going on?" I let the silence stretch for exactly as long as it needed to. "This," I said finally, gesturing around at the terminal, the uniformed officials, the ether logo emblazoned across every surface from the check-in counters to the tail fins visible through the windows, "is Ether Airways. My airline, Elena. The one my grandfather built. The one I've spent the last decade growing, while you called my life modest and stagnant." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. "You flew here on my planes," I continued, quieter now, though every word landed harder for it. "The Gulf Stream you assumed was some corporate perk I'd never dream of touching. That's mine too. I've owned it for 6 years. Elena's face had gone pale, the kind of pale that comes from blood draining somewhere deep and cold. Her eyes darted past me, toward Clara standing calmly at my side, then back to me, piecing together in real time exactly how thoroughly she'd misjudged the man she left behind at a departure gate less than a full day ago. "You let me believe," she started. "I didn't let you believe anything," I said. "You never asked.
In 8 years, you never once asked what I actually did beyond the vague title on my badge. You decided I was small, and it was easier for you to believe that than to look closer. Behind her, near the back of the disembarking crowd, I caught sight of Marcus finally emerging from the jet bridge, disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled from a night crammed into economy, sunglasses nowhere in sight. He spotted the formal procession, spotted me, and for one brief second I watched every ounce of color drain from his face too, as 2 French border security officers stepped forward and moved directly toward him.
Marcus Vance, one of the officers said, voice flat and official. We need you to come with us. What? Why? Marcus's charm had completely evaporated, replaced by raw panic. This is a mistake. It isn't, I said calmly, loud enough for Elena to hear every word. It's the same fraudulent account that funded your seats on this flight. $200,000 in falsified corporate travel benefits, stolen from my company's loyalty systems. You didn't target my wife by accident, Marcus. You targeted her because you thought her husband was low-level enough to exploit. Elena's eyes widened, understanding hitting her in slow, devastating waves. He used me? To get to your company? He tried to, I said. He just picked the wrong, modest husband. The officers led Marcus away, his protests fading into the general noise of the terminal, leaving Elena standing alone in the middle of the arrivals hall, mascara-streaked, exhausted, and utterly stripped of the certainty she'd worn like armor at Gate 12 the morning before. She looked at me the way a person looks at a stranger they suddenly realize they were married to for 8 years. "Daniel," she whispered, "please, I need to talk to you. Alone." I glanced at Clara, who gave me a small, steady nod, and then back at Elena, whose entire world had just collapsed in the space of a single sentence from an airport director. "Fine," I said. "Alone. But you're not going to like what I have to say." They gave us a small room near the customs security wing, the kind used for private consultations with detained passengers' families. Grey walls, a single table, 2 chairs, a window looking out over a service runway where luggage carts crawled back and forth like slow insects. Elena sat across from me, her carry-on abandoned somewhere outside with airport staff. She'd stopped trying to fix her smudged mascara. There was something almost unfamiliar about seeing her like this, not performing, not curating an image, just raw and frightened in a way I hadn't seen since the early years of our marriage, before ambition hardened into something else. "They're charging him with fraud," she said quietly, staring at her hands. "Real charges. Prison, probably." "Probably," I agreed. $200,000 doesn't disappear quietly. She looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed. "Did you know? Before yesterday, did you know what he was doing?" "No," I said honestly. "I knew you were seeing someone. I'd suspected for months. But I didn't know about the fraud until my security team pulled his file yesterday morning, right after you handed me those papers at the gate." She flinched at the memory, as if hearing it described out loud made it more real than living through it had. "I thought I was choosing something bigger, Daniel. I thought I was finally going to have the life I deserved." "You had a life, Elena. You just decided it wasn't big enough because it didn't come with headlines." Her jaw tightened, some old defensiveness flickering back to life even now. "You never told me. 8 years, and you never once told me who you really were. Do you have any idea what that's like? Watching every other wife in our circle live bigger, travel further, wear things I couldn't, while you just kept saying we needed to be careful with money." "I told you the truth," I said. "I told you my grandfather left me something complicated, that I was still figuring out how to handle it responsibly. You stopped listening the moment I didn't hand you a number. That's not fair. Isn't it?" I leaned forward. "You didn't fall for Marcus because he was more honest with you than I was. You fell for him because he was louder about lying. He promised you the world in words. I was actually building one, quietly, the way my grandfather taught me. Measure twice, cut once,
Never let anyone see the scaffolding until the building can stand on its own. Elena was quiet for a long moment, tears sliding silently down her face now, the kind she wasn't bothering to wipe away anymore. "I made a mistake," she finally whispered. "A horrible, stupid mistake. Please, Daniel, we have 8 years. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I'll go back to who I was before. I don't care about any of it anymore. The money, the lifestyle, none of it. I just want us back." I studied her face carefully, searching for the woman I'd married, the one who used to laugh at nothing in particular just because she was happy, who used to fall asleep reading beside me instead of scrolling through photos of other people's vacations. Some small part of that woman was still there, buried under years of dissatisfaction and comparison. But it wasn't enough. It had never been enough, and yesterday morning at Gate 12 had only proven it in the cruelest, clearest way possible. "You didn't leave me for Marcus because you loved him," I said quietly. "You left because you thought he offered more than I did. That's not a mistake, Elena. That's a decision, and decisions have consequences, even when we regret them the next day." "So that's it?" Her voice cracked. 24 hours and 8 years mean nothing?" "It's not about 24 hours. I sat back, feeling something settle inside me. Not anger anymore, something closer to finality. It's about what those 24 hours revealed. My grandfather used to tell me that wealth doesn't change people, it just removes the excuses that were hiding who they already were. Yesterday, at that gate, I saw exactly who you are when you think there's nothing left to hide behind." She pressed both hands over her face, shoulders shaking. "So, what happens now?" "Now," I said, standing up, buttoning my jacket, "you get exactly what you asked for at Gate 12. You wanted a life without me in it. You have that. Except now it comes with the truth attached, which I suspect is going to be a much harder thing to live with than you expected." "Daniel, please!" "My modest living was never about poverty, Elena," I said, my voice steady, even as something in my chest ached at the finality of the words. "It was a test, a condition my grandfather set before I could claim any of this publicly. Live quietly first, see who stays, see who leaves. I didn't design it to trap you, but it worked exactly the way he said it would." I paused at the door, looking back at her one last time. "You failed that test 24 hours too early, Elena. If you'd waited just one more day, you'd have known everything before you ever signed those papers. Instead, you chose to leave a modest man for a rich one. And it turns out, they were the same person all along." I walked out of the customs office and didn't look back, the door clicking shut behind me on 8 years of marriage, and one devastating truth she would carry with her long after this airport faded into memory. Clara was waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall with quiet patience, and when I stepped out, she simply asked, "Are you all right?" I thought about it honestly for the first time all day. "I think I will be," I said, "eventually." By evening, the city had shifted into its golden hour, the kind of light that made even ordinary streets look like postcards, and I stood in a private suite at the Grand Hotel, adjusting a black tie I hadn't planned on wearing 12 hours earlier. Somewhere across the city, in a cramped airport hotel room with a view of a parking garage, Elena sat with frozen bank accounts and a phone full of unanswered calls to a lawyer who hadn't opened her case file yet. Renata had confirmed it an hour ago, almost apologetically, as if delivering the report herself made her complicit in the outcome. I hadn't asked for the update. I hadn't needed to. Some part of me still tracked Elena's coordinates the way you keep checking a bruise, even knowing it'll hurt. I pushed the thought aside and finished dressing. Tonight wasn't about her. It never should have been, not really, and I refused to let one more evening of my life orbit around a decision she'd made without me in it. The ballroom at the Grand Hotel had been transformed for Ether's International Expansion Gala,
300 guests, investors, city officials, aviation journalists, all gathered beneath crystal chandeliers to celebrate a decade of growth I'd spent mostly out of the public eye. I'd always preferred it that way. My grandfather used to say a company should be known by what it builds, not by the face of the man who owns it. But tonight, for the first time, I found myself standing in the center of the room instead of watching from its edges, and it felt less like exposure than I expected. It felt like relief. Clara found me near the terrace doors, radiant in deep green, a folder of blueprints traded for a simple clutch, though I suspected she still had sketches tucked away somewhere out of habit. "You clean up well, Mr. Chairman," she said, a small smile tugging at her mouth. High praise from someone who watched me argue with a contractor about drywall this morning in a hard hat. Different context, different Daniel. She studied me for a moment, more seriously now. "How are you doing? Really?" I considered the question honestly, the way I always tried to with her. Lighter than I expected, which feels strange to admit less than 36 hours after my wife left me at a departure gate. "It's not strange," Clara said. "It's clarity. You spent 8 years bending yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. That kind of weight doesn't announce itself until it's gone." I let that settle, because it was true in a way I hadn't quite articulated to myself yet. A waiter passed with champagne, and Clara took 2 glasses, handing me one. "Come on, your investors have been asking about you for 20 minutes, and I promised the mayor's office you'd say something profound about sustainable aviation before the night's over." "I never said anything profound in my life." "Then tonight's a good night to start." The speech, when it came an hour later, wasn't the one I'd originally prepared. I'd written something safe weeks ago, full of growth percentages and route expansion numbers, the kind of language investors expected. Standing at the podium, under the chandelier light, looking out over a room full of people who'd helped build something real, I set the note cards aside. "A decade ago," I said, "my grandfather handed me an airline built on second-hand planes and a simple belief that quiet, patient work outlasts flash every time. I've spent most of my life honoring that by staying out of rooms like this one. Tonight, I'm here to tell you it worked. Ether now operates in 43 countries, employs over 60,000 people, and as of this year, completes the largest terminal expansion in our history, right here in Paris." I paused, glancing toward Clara standing near the front, her expression unreadable except for the quiet pride in her eyes. None of it happened because of flash. It happened because good people built it, slowly, carefully, without needing applause along the way. The applause came anyway, warm and sustained, and I found myself searching the crowd afterward, not for validation, but for her. Clara, standing exactly where she'd been, watching me the way she used to watch a finished blueprint, like something built right down to its foundation. Later, after most of the guests had drifted toward the terrace for photographs of the illuminated Eiffel Tower in the distance, Clara and I found a quiet corner near the windows, away from the noise. "You didn't mention Elena once in that speech," she said. "I didn't need to. She was never part of building any of this." Clara turned her glass slowly, watching the light catch the champagne. "Can I say something that might be inappropriate for tonight?" "You've never asked permission before." She laughed softly, a real laugh, unguarded. 12 years ago, in that studio, I used to think we'd end up building things together. Actual things. A firm, maybe. A life." She shook her head, almost embarrassed. "Then you left for the family business, and I told myself it was just a studio crush, the kind everyone has at 22. "And now?" "Now I design your terminals and watch you give speeches about patience, and I keep thinking that maybe 12 years wasn't a closed door. Maybe it was just slow scaffolding." I looked at her for a long moment, the noise of the gala fading into something distant and unimportant. For the first time since Gate 12, the ache in my chest wasn't about what I'd lost. It was about what I might still be standing close enough to find. Elena arrived at my attorney's office the next morning, wearing the same clothes from the airport, or something close to it, a borrowed blazer, hastily pressed, the kind of outfit assembled by someone trying to project composure they no longer felt. I watched her walk in through the frosted glass doors from where I sat with my legal team, and for a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked different physically, but because the certainty that used to define every step she took was gone. "Mr. Cole," my attorney, Beatrice Laurent, said quietly beside me, sliding a folder across the polished conference table. "Everything is prepared exactly as you requested." I nodded, watching Elena take a seat across from us, flanked by a French lawyer she must have hired in a panic sometime in the last 18 hours, young, clearly overwhelmed by the speed at which this case had assembled itself around him. Elena's eyes found mine before anyone spoke. There was a fragile hope in them that made something in my chest tighten, not with affection anymore, but with the discomfort of watching someone cling to an outcome that had already been decided. "Daniel," she said softly, "I know I don't deserve much. I'm not asking for much, just—" She glanced at her lawyer, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. "A fair settlement. Something to help me start over." Beatrice cleared her throat gently and opened the folder. "Mrs. Cole, before we proceed, I want to walk you through the terms of the prenuptial agreement you and Mr. Cole signed 8 years ago." Elena's lawyer leaned forward. "We're prepared to argue that circumstances have materially changed since—" "They haven't," Beatrice interrupted, not unkindly, simply factual. "The agreement is unambiguous. It states that in the event of divorce, each party retains only the assets they brought into the marriage, with one critical clause governing timing." She turned the document around, sliding it across the table toward Elena. "Section 4, paragraph 2. If divorce proceedings are initiated by either party before full financial disclosure has occurred between spouses, the initiating party forfeits any claim to assets acquired or held privately by the other party during the marriage." Elena stared at the paragraph, reading it once, then again, her lips moving slightly as she processed the language. "I don't understand. What does that mean?" "It means," Beatrice said gently, "that because you signed and served the divorce petition at Gate 12 before Mr. Cole disclosed his full financial position, which, per the terms you both agreed to 8 years ago, he was under no obligation to disclose unless directly asked, you forfeited any claim to Ether Airways, its assets, or Mr. Cole's personal estate." The room went very still. "That's not fair," Elena's lawyer said, though his voice lacked real conviction, as if he already sensed the argument was lost. "She had no way of knowing." "She didn't need to know," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since sitting down. "That was the entire point of the clause, Elena. My grandfather built that condition into every legal document tied to my inheritance. He didn't want anyone marrying into this family based on assumptions about what they might eventually gain. He wanted people who chose based on what they could actually see." Elena's hands trembled slightly against the table. "So I get nothing?" "You get what you brought into the marriage," Beatrice clarified. "Your personal savings, the jewelry that was gifted to you individually, your car, nothing acquired jointly, and nothing tied to Mr. Cole's private holdings." I watched something break behind Elena's eyes. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet collapse, like watching a building settle after the foundation gives out. She'd walked into this office still holding some fragment of hope that this could be salvaged into a comfortable exit, a graceful landing after a humiliating fall. Instead, she was learning that the fall had no landing at all. "I want to say something," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, looking directly at me and ignoring both lawyers entirely. "Not for the settlement. Just for me." Beatrice glanced at me, and I gave a small nod. "I was scared," Elena said. "For years. Scared that the life I had wasn't enough, that I'd wake up one day and realize I'd spent my youth on someone who'd never give me more than what we had.
I thought Marcus was proof that more existed, that I deserved it, that you were just too cautious to ever give it to me. She wiped at her eyes, careful not to smear what little composure she had left. I didn't know the truth was standing right in front of me the whole time. I threw it away because I was too impatient to trust it. I let the silence sit for a moment before answering. You didn't lose because you were impatient, Elena. You lost because you decided my worth based on what you could see on the surface. That's not a timing problem. That's who you are. She flinched, but didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue with. The settlement was signed 20 minutes later, Elena's hand visibly shaking as she pressed her signature to the final page. She left the office without another word, her borrowed blazer suddenly looking too big for her heels echoing down the marble hallway of Place Vendôme until the sound faded entirely. Beatrice closed the folder and looked at me carefully. Are you satisfied with the outcome, Mr. Cole? I thought about the question longer than I expected to. I'm not satisfied, I said finally. But I think, for the first time in a long time, I finally feel free. The glass balcony overlooking the runway caught the late afternoon sun in long amber streaks, and I stood there with my hands resting on the railing, watching an ether jet taxi toward the runway below. 6 months ago, I would have watched this same view and felt nothing but quiet satisfaction in the machinery of a company running well. Today, it felt different. Today, it felt like watching the last page of something finally turn. Clara stepped out onto the balcony behind me, 2 cups of coffee in hand, the Paris wind catching loose strands of her hair before she tucked them back with practiced ease. You disappeared during the closing remarks, she said, handing me a cup. The city planner was very disappointed. He wanted a photo. I'll survive his disappointment. She leaned against the railing beside me, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched, and for a while, neither of us said anything. Below us, ground crews moved between aircraft with the choreography of people who'd done this 1,000 times, and beyond them, the Paris skyline stretched out gold and hazy in the fading light. How does it feel? Clara asked eventually. Walking away from something you spent 8 years building, only to realize it was never really built on anything at all. I considered the question honestly. Lighter than it should. My grandfather used to say that the hardest part of building anything real is figuring out which parts of the foundation were never actually load-bearing. I think I just found out mine had a lot of decoration and not much structure. Clara smiled faintly into her coffee. That's very poetic for a man who almost missed his own gala speech because he was brooding on a hotel terrace. I wasn't brooding. I was thinking. Same thing, with better lighting. I laughed, an actual laugh, the first one that had felt unforced in days, and something about the ease of it made me turn to look at her properly. Clara Odom, hard hat traded for heels, blueprints traded for a folder she still somehow managed to carry everywhere, watching me with the same steady patience she'd shown 12 years ago in a cramped studio room, back when neither of us knew how to say what we actually meant. I keep thinking about something you said at the gala, I told her, about slow scaffolding. I remember. I think you were right. I think some things take 12 years to finish, not because they're broken, but because they're built to last, and things built to last don't rush. Clara set her coffee down on the railing, turning to face me fully now, something careful and hopeful in her expression. Daniel, I need you to know something, and I need to say it before I lose my nerve, because architects aren't usually great at improvising without a blueprint. Go ahead. I didn't take the job at Ether because of the salary, or the portfolio, or even the chance to design something as ambitious as this terminal. She gestured vaguely at the structure rising around us, still humming faintly with the sounds of finishing crews somewhere below. I took it because you asked me, personally, and some stubborn 22-year-old part of me that never fully let go of that studio still wanted to be close to whatever you were building next. I just never expected it to take this long to say it out loud. I set my own coffee down beside hers, the runway lights beginning to flicker on in the distance as dusk settled gently over the city.
Clara, I spent 8 years married to someone who saw a modest jacket and decided that was the whole story. You've spent 3 years watching me build terminals and negotiate rooftop gardens and argue about ceiling heights, and you never once needed the ending of the story to know it was worth staying for. That's not exactly a declaration, Daniel. I'm getting there. Give the architect a minute. I'm working without blueprints, too. She laughed, soft and real, and something between us finally settled into place. Not rushed, not dramatic, just the quiet click of 2 pieces that had been waiting 12 years to fit. I'm not interested in rebuilding what I had with Elena, I said finally. I don't think I even want to rebuild what I thought marriage was supposed to look like. But I think I'd like to build something new, slowly, carefully, with someone who already knows exactly what my foundation is made of. Clara reached into her folder and pulled out a single rolled document, offering it to me with a small, knowing smile. Then it's a good thing I brought this. I unrolled it carefully. Blueprints, not for the Paris terminal, but for something new entirely, marked at the top corner in Clara's careful architect's handwriting. Ether Tokyo, preliminary concept. I was going to wait until Monday to bring this up officially, she said, but I think today's earned an exception. I looked at the plans, then at her, then out at the runway where the first lights of evening were beginning to trace the outline of the city beyond the airport's edge. 24 hours ago, I had stood at a different gate, watching a marriage end in the space of a single sentence. Now I stood here, holding the outline of something entirely new, next to someone who had never once needed convincing of my worth. Tokyo, I said quietly, testing the shape of the word, the shape of what it might mean to build something again, deliberately, with someone who understood exactly what patience was worth. Tokyo, Clara agreed, taking my hand as the last of the sunlight slipped below the horizon, gold light stretching long and warm across the tarmac. Whenever you're ready. I looked out at the planes lined up for departure, engines humming with quiet, patient power, each one carrying people towards somewhere new. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel like a man standing at the end of something. I felt like a man standing, finally, at the beginning.